Hey, how's it going, everyone? Can you just let me know that you can hear me okay? Just give me a 1, and I'll just wait to see that, and then I'll be good to go. You'll hear me okay? No, I haven't seen anything yet. Okay, we're good to go. Okay, so welcome everyone. So as you can see, we're looking at replicas of Mecca in Central and Eastern Asia. I came across a paper there recently, which started me off on this topic, and of course I start discovering other things as a result of the paper. And I spoke to Jay yesterday, and Jay has got some other gems connected to this, which he'll bring up at a later time. Hello to Andrew Green. Looks like an interesting episode, Mel. I hope you are well. Thank you, Andrew. Okay, so I'm going to get stuck in here. Let me just make sure I've got I'm still kind of trying to get used to working this. So let me see if this works. I want to get full screen if I can. If I can remember how to do it. Oh, I remember now. Okay. No, that's not it. Bear with me a second. Okay. So coming up, at the Khorasan Atta Mausoleum, there is one of the most unusual structures in Kazakhstan. Would you like to hazard a guess? We're going to find out what that is a little bit later in the episode. And it's slow here on my end. Yeah, Sergeant Grinch, I thought everything in Islam is a copy. Yeah, this is definitely going to show you this. We've often said Mecca is a facsimile of Jerusalem, but did it stop with Mecca? Well, the short answer is no. And why all these replicas that we're going to see is so useful is because often people say, well, no one could possibly get away with copying Jerusalem and doing a replica of it in Mecca. Surely someone would say something. Well, in Islam, they have continuously copied Mecca and the Kaaba and the circumambulation and the Black Stone in multiple locations, as you'll see, and no one raised a fuss about it. And even some of these are very recent, as recently as the 19th century. And just like with everything else with Islam, they produced myths around it. They came up with really imaginative stories, including someone walking on water and everything. It's all crazy stuff. And so, Andrew, we'll see if you're right at the end. And hello to Chris. Great to see you. I'm hoping some of this material will be of use to you at Speaker's Corner. I will send you on a copy of this afterwards. Okay, now let's go. It's a little bit laggy, bit slow here on my end. I'm just waiting for slides to change over. Now, replica Mecca in Istanbul raises eyebrows. So, we often spoke about Mecca being like a Las Vegas, a theme park. Well, without any irony at all, Istanbul has set up a replica of Mecca and various other things, which is really like a theme park. Obviously, people raised eyebrows, but it didn't seem to cause too much fuss. Let's have a look a bit more. And I think I'm having problems with the internet. It's a bit slow. Don't know why. Okay, so a district mayor in Istanbul from Turkey's ruling Justice and Development Party has raised some eyebrows by constructing the replicas of Islam's holiest places and objects, yet the built-in idea seems to have spread elsewhere. The Ushkadar municipality in the Asian side of Istanbul inaugurated the Village of the Age of Happiness on April 19th. The Age of Happiness is an Islamic term that refers to the time of Prophet Muhammad, whose birthday according to the Western calendar, is currently being celebrated with public events. This is from a news story from a couple of years ago. Now it's strange how I tested out this PowerPoint earlier on, and there was no lag, but as soon as it went online, there's suddenly a massive lag. Okay, so they have everything in this theme park. They have the Kaaba, they have the Prophet Muhammad's house, the Hira cave, the Sever cave, the Mualak stone, the Zamzam well, and even an elephant. You can see the elephant there in the background. Let me see. I see Sergeant Grinch has said, did Abraham build that Kaaba too? I'm sure they'll probably find a way of making him responsible for it. So you have various different objects. There was even a protester who made a Hajj pilgrimage to the place, and he got detained. It obviously triggers some criticism on social media. I don't know what I'm going to do to speed it up. Lloyd, I see you're trying to jump on. That'd be great. So I'll look out for you. So here we have a Hijra walking track. It features newer and apparently lower budget replicas of the Kaaba. And they had even a traffic sign that reads the distance to Medina. Eventually it stirred some controversy and they had to remove some of the decorations. Right, I'm just waiting for it to change. It's very slow here. You can see the replica Kaaba in the background. Free camel urine at rest stops, says Sergeant Grinch. Okay, now there wasn't much fuss. There was a little bit of criticism with the one that was done in Istanbul, but when China decided to construct a life-size replica of Mecca, it caused major furore, as you can imagine. Obviously, it wasn't being done for the same reasons. I'm just waiting for it to load. It's surprisingly slow. I don't know why. Okay, so the disclosure by Chinese authorities of a planned life-size replica of the religious site of Mecca has stemmed controversy in the Arab world, as King Salman bin Abdul Aziz Al Saud of Saudi Arabia has vehemently attacked Chinese officials for this blatant offense to Islam and promises repercussions similar to 9/11 if the project is not abandoned, reports Al Jazeera. Now, it's interesting, he doesn't make a fuss about the Turkish one, but when the Chinese do the same thing, it's suddenly a problem. Maybe it's depends what the intention behind it is. So the Mecca, a site that is sacred to all Muslims around the world and attracts more than 6 million visitors every year during the Hajj, held in the 12th Muslim lunar month, is scheduled to be built by 2016. I didn't actually follow up to see whether it got built or not. I believe it has, where already are found replicas of the Paris Eiffel Tower and so forth. Although China claims the building will in fact be a celebration of the Muslim community worldwide, the Minister of Tourism, Hoi Yan Chao, has committed himself to supervise the construction and make sure the replica is as real as possible. I don't think that's going to reassure them. I think the problem is that it's too like it. The newly appointed king of Saudi Arabia has threatened Chinese authorities of grave repercussions similar to 9/11 if the life-size replica of Mecca is built. Perhaps they're worried about tourism going down if Chinese Muslims decide that they might go to this one instead of going all the way to Saudi Arabia, perhaps. So what do you think of that so far? So these are just more recent ones, but we're going to have a look at more historical ones in just a moment. By building this life-size replica of Mecca, Chinese officials intend to cash in on millions of Muslim pilgrims who originate from the Southeast Asian region and who cannot afford the trip to Mecca. So once again, when we look into it, we find that money is a big driver in all of this. So obviously the Saudi Arabians would not be happy that money might be diverted anywhere else, whatever about the religious side of things. Okay, just see Andrew Green's comment there. I will say somewhat off topic, but also on topic. I knew many Pakistanis who were discriminated against when visiting Mecca 20 years ago. I'm sure there is a certain amount of racism or discrimination that goes on, unfortunately. Okay. So now we're going to kind of get into the meat and bones. The paper that I found, which you can look up and you'll be able to have a read of it yourself in due course, it's called Pilgrimage to the Second Meccas and Kaabas of Central Asia, and it's by Thierry Zarconi. I think it's an Italian surname, so it's either that or Zarcone, one or the other. And it is a very in-depth paper. Usually I can cut it down and just pick out the juicy bits, but actually I found that they are this one has got so many things in it I couldn't leave out much, so it's going to be a bit of a long one. Alika says, I'm sure there will become substitutes in the future. I believe in the law of least resistance. Yeah, that's true. Thanks, Simon, for the comment. I'm really enjoying your latest vids. Posted some questions on the one you did with Bob. I'll go back and have a look and see if there's some that I haven't answered there. So this is what our scholar has to say. It is a frequently overlooked fact that many places across the Muslim world, from Europe all the way to India and China, have long been regarded by constituencies of the faithful as analogous in status and function to the sanctuaries of the Haramain. Often centering upon some renowned geological feature or the mausoleum of a dead sheikh, such places are generally depicted as a second Mecca, second Kaaba, or Mecca of the Persians. In rare instances, they are identified as a second Medina, equivalent to the mausoleum of the Prophet. Many of the most important of these controversial sanctuaries are located in Central Asia and in eastern Turkestan. This doubtless reflects in part the region's extreme remoteness from the Arabian Peninsula and the Haramain. It also reflects the spiritually numinous topography of a region with strong Sufi traditions. Rather than simply poor replicas of an Arabian original, several of the so-called second Meccas and Kaabas are actually considered by locals to be more sacred than Mecca itself. So that's quite a bombshell. Being associated as they are via some intercessory, shakily figure, I think that's an adjective to do with sheikh, with the immaculate inner dimensions of Islam. They're thus regarded in a sense as inner hidden Meccas. Among these second Meccas, we find extensive variation in the acknowledged efficaciousness of pilgrimage. Okay, so we'll see that sometimes they say that Hajj to these places are worth two Hajjs to these places are the same as one to Mecca. Other times it might be 3, sometimes it's 7. It's very random. It goes on to say that in the case of some of these shrines, pilgrimage is regarded as complementary to the Hajj. Pilgrimage to others, by contrary, is deemed to be every bit as efficacious as the Arabic pilgrimage, and indeed a worthy substitute for it. I see Dragon there in the house. Hello to Dragon. Very interesting, and indeed money is a key Saudi. Saudi earn lots of money for Umrah and Hajj for Muslims around the world. They wouldn't be happy if someone else cashed the money. Exactly. So I see Sergeant Grinch says, can we build a Mecca copy in Detroit or Minneapolis? That should help Christian-Muslim relations. I'm sure it would. Before we investigate the case of the second Meccas of Central Asia, it may be of interest to have a quick look at the same phenomenon in the rest of the Muslim world. According to the 10th century Arab geographer al-Muqaddasi, there existed near Nineveh in Iraq a sanctuary which rivaled Mecca, since 7 visits to this place were equivalent to the Meccan pilgrimage. Now, if you notice when this is mentioned, the 10th century, so there was already a duplicate in Iraq in the 10th century. I find that quite incredible. But most instances of the phenomenon are to be found in the non-Arab lands. In the Balkans, for instance, there exist 2 major holy places, one in Bulgaria and the other in Bosnia-Herzegovina. The mausoleum of Yenehan Baba, situated at the top of the mountain of Shovoboda in Bulgaria, is regarded as the Mecca of Bulgaria. So we can see that there's not just 1 or 2 of these. There's quite a lot of different places that act as substitute Meccas. And the idea being that for people who can't go on the real Hajj, this is like a substitute, the equivalent of it. So with this one, with a single pilgrimage hither regarded as equivalent to pilgrimage to Mecca. So that Bulgarian one, it's like for like. So one Hajj to the Bulgarian shrine would be the equivalent of a pilgrimage to Mecca. Yen Ilan Baba was an antinomian dervish linked to the famous Ottoman Baba, both being introducers of Islam in Eastern Europe. At Prusak in central Bosnia-Herzegovina, meanwhile, the tomb of the mythical Hajjs Dedo, a supposed propagandist of Islam in the region in 15th century, is considered to be similar to the Meccan Kaaba. By the beginning of the 20th century, the sanctuary of Hajjs Dedo was called both the Kaaba of the Poor and the Little Kaaba, and visitors to this place were called Hajji upon returning home. I see Sergeant Grinch says money is the root of Islam. It is indeed. I'm hoping to have Lloyd on, and in fact, Lloyd has just joined us. Lloyd, welcome. Can you hear me?
Hey, thank you for having me, Mel. I much appreciate the invitation.
I'm going to see if I can switch my camera on, if I can.
Hold on, no, I did myself from the
Here
screen.
we are.
Mel.
Yeah, so we've just looked at a few places so far. There is a location in Bulgaria which is considered equal to the Hajj in Mecca. Let me just go back a slide here. Just one more. Do you know, suddenly, as soon as you've come online, suddenly I can switch between slides easier. It took about 15 seconds for the slides to change for me up to now. I don't know why. That's strange. But so at the top of a mountain called Svoboda. I don't know. I'm very bad at pronouncing things. Svoboda in Bulgaria. That's considered equivalent to Mecca for the Bulgarian Muslims. Svoboda. And as early as the 10th century, there was a place in Nineveh that...
Mel, can you hear me right now?
I can, yeah. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Okay. Yeah, but I'm hearing myself a few seconds later in the stream, so I'm not hearing myself real time.
Yeah.
Yes, I can.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, there seems to be a lag there. I don't know why. Sergeant Grinch says, greetings, Grand Mufti Lloyd. So...
Mel, there's actually, if you look at the word... Hey, everyone. You mentioned the word Al-Haramain earlier.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you know something on that one?
So these are the 2 holy places, usually Mecca and Medina, but occasionally in Mamluk and Ottoman usage, it was also Jerusalem and Hebron.
Right. And how does that connect with
And
The
remember a couple of weeks ago, I showed you a paper. I'm looking for the book, right?
Go ahead.
Where this guy said Mecca, one of the names of Mecca is Jerusalem.
Yes, I remember you saying that one. Yeah. I'm waiting there because I think there's is there a lag still?
We're having some crazy delay though, so
Yeah. I think it might be just the internet is slow on my end. It's holding things up, I think. Okay. So I'm going to just go on to where I got to there. The paper goes on to say that imitative substitutes for the Hajj exist also in Morocco, Senegal, and Baluchistan. Now it's interesting. I was talking to Jay yesterday. Well, he left me a voicemail message, and he said there was a place in Senegal. It's quite a significant one, and they have the whole shebang. They've got the circumambulation. They've got a Kaaba, and they're kind of diverting really away from Islam. They're forming their own form of Islam, where the local guy has become the prophet, who is more important than Muhammad. So this is the kind of deterioration that goes on over the centuries, where Islam keeps splitting into sects, and they go off creating additional places and additional myths, and it keeps going on and on like that, you know. He goes on to say, in India, meanwhile, an inscription dated 1657 in the Congregational Mosque in the city of Ulmada in Bengal presents this sanctuary as a second Kaaba. Noteworthy also is the case of an Indian second Medina. The shrine in question is located at Srinagar in Kashmir at the tomb of Hazrat Bal. At the repository of a single sacred hair belonging to the Prophet Muhammad, Hazrat Bal's tomb also functions as an imitative mausoleum of the Prophet. Welcome back. Is this any better? Any better, Lloyd? Can you hear me, Lloyd? Is it any better? We'll just wait till Lloyd gets back. According to Muhammad Ishaq Khan, in an article on the shrine, this imitative function reflects the practical difficulties in performing the sacred
cannot
duties of the
see
Hajj.
or hear anything.
Can you not? Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? No. It seems to be a really heavy lag. Okay, I'll just carry on there. As Khan writes, a visit to the shrine would at least have reduced in the devotee's religious consciousness the apparent difference of the physical barriers between the Arab and the Ajam, Ajam being the foreigner. To make this point clearer, Khan quotes the following verse of a local poet. Okay. Is the video frozen for other people? Just if you can leave a message in the post. It seems to be very slow today. Just kind of wait till. Can you hear me? Okay. There's a lag, says Chris. Chris, can you let us know if you're able to hear me? Okay, can hear you. Okay, I'll just carry on, and if Lloyd can fix it on his end, he'll be able to join us, hopefully. Whoever has seen the sacred hair of Muhammad has had in reality the vision of the Prophet. Although he's entombed in Arabia, his sacred hair sanctifies the Ajam, who reveals the eternal reality of his radiance only to those in Kashmir who have an abiding faith and are spiritually illuminated. So the suggestion being that having a hair of Muhammad makes that place just as important and significant as any place in Mecca. Okay. If you hear me, Lloyd, just let me know. Okay. Andrew Green says the video is fine here. Just sounds a bit like Father Ted with "Can you hear me, Lloyd?" Yeah, it's a bit like that. So the second Mecca at Alanja in Kurdistan functions very differently. Known as the Maktelja, place of assassination, the shrine here is the mausoleum of Fadil Allah, 14th century founder of the Hurufi movement. Given Fadi Allah's heretical reputation, pilgrimage to this tomb functions not as a complement to the Hajj, but a rival alternative. Pilgrims to the tomb perform certain rituals which are heavily redolent of Meccan practices. These include circumambulation and the stoning of the fort of Merenshah. This latter a close analogue of the casting of stones at the devil at Mina near Mecca. As far away as northern China, meanwhile, we find at Tianfang a major mausoleum of the Qadiri Sufi lineage called the Great Gombe or Tomb. Although this place is not officially described as a second Mecca or Kaaba, the Chinese Sufis argues that the pilgrimage to Mecca is unnecessary if a pilgrimage to the Great Gombe is performed. So we can see there's lots of examples here of alternative places that function the same as Mecca, or at least like a fraction of Mecca. Lloyd, can you hear me now? Excellent. Okay. It's going to carry on. And okay, just waiting for it to come. I was looking at that word Tianfang. It seems to, from my understanding, I think one of the words means something like heaven or sky, but I couldn't get the full etymology of it, and it's actually an ancient Chinese word that represents Arabia. But unfortunately, it'd be very helpful if there was any Chinese person who could perhaps give us the breakdown of the name. You obviously probably will need to look at the Chinese characters, but that might give us clues in terms of the Chinese perception of Arabia centuries ago. So that's one for the linguist. Perhaps there's a Chinese person watching that could.
Yeah, I see with this Tianfang, I see a scholar called Wang Taiyu in the Encyclopedia of Islam, volume 11.
Yeah.
Wang Taiyu, who studied Persian and Islamic sciences and Islamic languages.
Yeah.
And there's another one in volume 9. Let me just have a look and see what it comes up with. Obviously, I just got you back, so I'm just catching up.
Yeah, yeah.
Let me see. Okay, Tianfang. They speak of a religion of the Western lands lying between Tibet and Mongolia. Tinfang. It's also known as Tinfang. T'-I-N Fang. So there's another spelling. So Chinese Islam, they speak of it here. So there are 2 entries in Encyclopedia of Islam.
Yeah. Okay.
This is really interesting.
Yeah, I didn't realize there was so many different locations. So it just seems like they have their own local shrines everywhere. And I can imagine how the Saudis are trying to promote Mecca, and they can see that there's these other places, and they're losing out on all these potential pilgrims, and they're probably not too happy that there's rival Hajjs going on elsewhere. So I can't see the top part of it, but however, it is in Central Asia that we find the greatest concentration of shrines supposedly rivaling Mecca. Among such shrines, we can discern 2 categories. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, it says the Chinese Muslims have always had a consciousness for the Western lands, that the focus of their faith lay in what they call the Western lands, the Tianfang or celestial region. Celestial region obviously is an astronomical reference, which could take us to paganism again.
Yeah.
And they have endeavored to send a trickle, at least, of believers for the Arabian pilgrimage.
Yeah. So celestial region, that's interesting. Yeah, I remembered it was something to do with sky or heaven, but I didn't get the
yeah, this is Encyclopedia of Islam, volume 9.
Yeah, very good. So it says, among such shrines, we can discern 2 categories. The first category comprises those second Meccas, which serve as full substitutes for the Arabian Mecca. These are often known as Mecca of the Persians, or Ajam. Persians here being understood broadly to signify non-Arab peoples. That won't be news to anyone here. To this first category belongs some of the most important and visited sanctuaries of Central Asia and Eastern Turkestan. Their widespread renown explaining why locals have long considered them equivalent to the Temple of Mecca. So you can understand it from their point of view. That is probably the only Hajj that they will go on, and it obviously makes sense for them to consider it equal or on a par with the one in Mecca. Okay. Okay, just waiting for it to load up. I see there's a person in the chat that says, I'm not Chinese speaker, but I know Hanzei or kanji in Japanese. Does that help in terms of the word? Does it ring any bells? Maybe if you see anything in terms of the word, maybe. But I think celestial region might be all there is to it. Maybe there's more to it, but
but it's considered a religion as well. But it doesn't explicitly say Islam. But it's What's the other word? Just mention the word.
Just Qian Fang. That was the only word I think I've mentioned.
All right.
Yeah. I do know that the Chinese had an alternative name for Islam, which was the religion of the Dashi. And the Dashi is the Chinese way of saying Taiyaye, which are the people who lived in Iraq and Syria. They are the Tay, sometimes referred to as the Tay. So it's interesting. They've kept that memory. But when the Abbasids took over and they changed the narrative to being focused on the Quraysh, that was forgotten about in Iraq and Arabia and so forth. But it was remembered in China to this day.
Okay.
You
mentioned the word haram earlier, like haramain.
Yeah.
Right. And haram is also associated with Mecca, the haram, right?
Yeah.
And haram originally meant pyramid. So it has an Egyptian connotation. And it generally lent towards the pyramid of Cheops and Chephren, which is very interesting because I found this a really unusual meaning, that haram comes from pyramid. And then haram, right, is a term also representing everything that is forbidden to those who are not of the higher caste. So the profane, it is forbidden to the profane. And then further, haramiya, the plural, right, means bastards, commonly used today as highway bandits, but in the past it seems to have come from the word bastards.
Right, okay, that's interesting. Like when I think of the pyramid, I think of hierarchy, and I can see how that would fit in with the idea of a caste system. It makes perfect sense. It's like a visual caste system. It's just strange that they didn't go for a pyramid rather than a cube when they were building it, considering the name. Okay, so such shrines include the Throne of Solomon at Ush, Kyrgyzstan, the People of the Cavern, Ashab al-Kaf. Now that is to do with the 7 sleepers. So they have 7 sleeper caves, duplicate ones all over the place as well. One of the places being at Turfan in China, and the Mausoleum Mazar of Imam Jafar Sadiq at Khotan, again in China, each of which I shall discuss in turn. Notably, none of the above are Sufi shrines. They thus contrast with the second category of renowned places where we find located the mausoleum lodges of the major figures of Central Asian Sufism. So will be explained below. The word Mecca is sometimes replaced in this category by the term Kaaba, the temple of Mecca, or that of Qibla, the direction of Mecca. Consequently, the expressions second Kaaba or second Qibla. The most representative shrines in this category are those of Ahmed Yasawi at Turkestan, Baha al-Din, Naqshband at Bukhara, Yusuf Hamadani at Bayram in Merv, and Hatim Atta in Uzbekistan. Okay, so I'm sorry, there's a lot of content here, and I'm probably giving maybe too much, but what was I going to say? The idea of them having a substitute seven sleepers cave is very interesting because they have to concoct a story to go with that as well, like their own version of the story, which really shows up the fact that it's being fabricated. But we'll come to that in a second. So the Throne of Solomon in Uzbekistan, the renowned Throne of Solomon at Ush is a surprisingly modern shrine entering the historical records under this name only in the 18th or 19th century. It is the site of a cult dedicated to the King Solomon, who, according to legend, visited Ush and stayed there for a while. A low, isolated hill situated at the center of the city with a small edifice at the top. The throne is not presented as the place for a tomb or a mausoleum, but as a station or a place of arrival. The throne has quickly become a reputed pilgrimage destination and one of the prominent places of devotion in Central Asia. As the place where, according to local tradition, Solomon used to rule the world with the help of the jinns, the sanctuary became also a place where the latter are venerated. So they venerate the jinns there. The throne belongs, in our opinion, to a category of saint cult. Any thoughts on that one?
This is all new to me, Mel. So
Yeah, it's a lot to take in, isn't it?
yeah, it's too much too soon. Yes, that's a
Yeah.
lot. I mean,
yeah. I should have maybe broken this down into parts.
yeah. Also, I tend to highlight the text, so I highlight separate ideas.
Yeah.
When you read a flat wall of text, it's very hard to get
to take in. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
A station, a place of arrival. Stations are interesting because when you look at the scholars of Islam, they speak of stations, but instead of stations of the cross, they've got stations of like a Gnostic occult ritual where you say you do incantations and you reach different stations. As you leave your body, you start to enter into the spiritual realm and you eventually enter into the throne room of Allah at the final station. So stations are basically from this Gnostic or occultic practice that's discussed in the encyclopedia and other sources.
Yeah, I've heard mention of stations of Abraham mentioned in Islamic history but it sounds like they're adding that Gnostic meaning to it. The other thing I wanted to say about Solomon is the fact that Solomon was a big figure in the Ethiopic church. So it's interesting how that has fed as far afield as Central Asia now. It's kind of gone through Arabia, and I don't know if that shows some sense of an influence there.
But also early in Muslim sources, as I remember, now I need to speak advisedly here, but because of his association with the Queen of Sheba, who was a Sabaean, the Yemeni Sabaean, who was from the same religion as Babylon, who were worshipping the moon god Shin or Mecca.
Yeah.
Apparently, many early scholars of Islam thought that Solomon was also a pagan. So they put him down as a pagan worshipper like the Queen of Sheba. So they misrepresent him as well.
Okay, that's interesting. And maybe perhaps they see that as a defense or an apologist for having any sort of leanings in that direction, maybe as well. Would that be possible? The throne belongs, in our opinion, to a category of saint cult with a rich and complex ritual of devotion. First, there are several unrelated places of worship disseminated on the hill. Secondly, the pilgrimage follows a planned route beginning and finishing at very precise places. This kind of fits in, I think, with the idea of a Gnostic connotation. The itinerary followed by the pilgrimage is divided into several stations with shrines and sacred natural elements, springs, caves, rocks, and trees, all being places for prayers. That's, to me, sounds very much like a pagan element there. The 7 major stations are the visiting of the throne of the king at the top of the hill, the slipping on the rock, the passing of the Sirat Bridge, which is a Zoroastrian concept, I would have thought, the Water Drops Cave, with a spring identified as the Zamzam spring of Mecca, the Solomon Stone, the mausoleum of Asaf bin Barakia, and the Spring of Paradise. Some of these stations refer to Solomon's mythic biography, other to the Quran imitations of the pilgrimage at Mecca, some other to Solomon's magical powers. So I think there's a lot there to suggest what you're saying about the Gnostic element. And a note there at the end, the magical powers elements, which you've kind of dealt with that kind of area recently, haven't you?
Yeah, and also there's the whole idea of the very precise. Where was it said the very precise places? Now, there's
Yeah,
also, in terms of in Islam, there's the word azima, which has more than one meaning. One of its meanings is connected to magic, and that when you recite, you have to recite the incantation very precisely, or it doesn't have the magical effect it intends.
yeah,
So if you have this level of precision on a ritual, if this is a pilgrimage, why does it need precision? So if it's
yeah,
precision, then it's a ritual. It's not just a pilgrimage.
yeah. It does seem to have a kind of like a magical element to it. It sounds like it's incantations where, yeah, as you say, the precision is important. Okay, let's move on from there. Certainly, the Sirat Bridge, I believe that's that bridge, isn't it? That's found in Zoroastrianism, unless I've got the name wrong. The bridge between heaven and hell.
Mhm.
I think that's what it is. Surprisingly, the ritual of circumambulation, which is pivotal in saint cult, is replaced here by the itinerary. So this is a substitute. This is like a local variation on it. However, some pilgrims perform the tawaf around that edifice, which is supposed to contain the throne of the king at the top of the hill. So they do their circumambulation at the top of the hill. Unlike the case with a great number of saint shrines, the throne is not linked to Sufi tradition. From a legend recorded in the 19th century, the mosque erected at the foot of the hill was built by the Prophet Abraham on the model of the Mosque of Mecca, which was also a creation of Abraham. Now, someone in the chat said, I bet you one of these places were built by Abraham. And lo and behold, that's what they claim as well. So they have no shame in dropping Abraham or any of the other prophets whenever they needed someone to back these up. Called Venerable Mecca by Abraham, the throne is intended to be a pilgrimage place for the Persian believers, thus obviating the need for pilgrimage to the Mecca of the Arabs. So it's this kind of tension between the Mecca of the Arabs and the Mecca of the Persians. And I think there's an element of that when I read the Hadiths. There's kind of almost like an attitude of disparaging the Arabs and speaking up the Persians. I think there might be something in that. Simon says, let me show you this. It reminds me of all the different Hindu and Buddhist shrines. I'd say there must be a certain amount of influence there. What do you think?
I'd agree.
Yeah.
From what I've
Okay.
looked, I definitely see a Hindu influence, most certainly. I haven't delved into it, but I think it's definitely there.
Yeah. I think once you get into Khorasan and then further east, you're hitting straight against the Buddhist and Hindu beliefs there. Okay, just waiting for it to load here. Now, the narrator reports that the Prophet Abraham built Mecca and stayed there. After hearing about the qualities and merit of Ush, he went to the city and saw that there was no water there for anyone who might want to set up a mosque. So Abraham drew milk from a weak camel and built a mosque according to the model of the mosque at Mecca. He gave this mosque the name of Venerable Mosque and said, "Let this place be a pilgrimage for the people of Persia. Whoever comes to this mosque during the festival of sacrifice performs a prayer with 2 prostrations. It is as though he makes the Hajj. According to another tradition, if one goes on pilgrimage to the Mecca of the Persians, his going to the Mecca of the Arabs becomes unnecessary." So it's essentially the same. Now, you see how they're, whenever they're trying to buttress these shrines, they drop a saint in as a kind of like a support to it. You know, to say, well, Mecca was built by Abraham, and here we have another example of like a second Mecca being built by Abraham.
You know what?
Yeah,
But you said word ziyarat on the third last line. Ziyarat.
yeah,
Isn't that very similar to the term zigurat?
it is. Yeah, yeah. There must be a link, and of course, I'm just trying to think. Would that be a Persian word there? I don't.
Yeah, well, that would be Iraq, right? The ziggurat of
Yeah,
the big
yeah,
ziggurats of the
yeah,
pagan religions of
yeah,
Mesopotamia.
yeah, yeah. It'd be interesting to see what connotation that word has. There might be some hidden meaning in it. Well
I'll
done,
try and
Trish.
look into it now.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll just carry on, and if you spot anything there. Ziyare. Let me just put it up on the screen here. Ziyara means visit in Arabic.
Actually, more than that, it means visitation of graves. They have ziyarat al-qubur, the visiting of graves. Yeah,
Right.
ziyara is visitation, but they speak of ziyarat al-qubur, the visiting of graves.
Okay. That's cool. The tradition has continued without interruption down to the present day. In 1915, the famous author Kulpan wrote in the Tartar journal that a grave situated in a room of a mosque at the throne of Solomon was called the Mecca of the Persians. No surprise there. So a grave is considered a Mecca of the Persians. Kulpan adds that since the Mecca of the Arabs is the Kaaba-Tullah, this grave might be depicted as a second Kaaba or a Kaaba for the Persians. In the middle of the 20th century, a curator of the throne could thus still affirm that there were two Meccas. One is situated in Arabia, the other is at Osh. But in the Soviet period, the throne was regarded by the communist regime as one of the more popular and dangerous saint cults, and it was quickly desecrated and closed. So, about a year ago, I did a series with Jay, and we focused on the mausoleums that existed, particularly the ones in Medina, and it essentially went against the later narrative that Muhammad had said you are not to pray at graves and so forth. But now I'm beginning to see why there's these hadiths. Maybe they're trying to argue against this idea of praying at graves because that's the competition. It's drawing pilgrims away from Mecca.
That's a fairly good point. That's an interesting point you raise.
So there's usually politics going on with a lot of these things, and hadiths are inundated with politics. I'm convinced
Actually, you know why?
series,
Here, I've just found something in the Encyclopedia of the Quran.
Yeah.
They speak of the sepulchre of the Prophet in Medina, the Muslim holy tomb par excellence. This has led Muslim scholars, or some Muslim scholars, to prefer Medina over Mecca because the spot of the Prophet's tomb is nobler than the Kaaba and the throne of God.
Wow, that says it all, doesn't it?
So this then obviously would say why they should visit, because it was taking attention away from Mecca.
Yeah, and actually, believe it or not, there is a story that I read in the Chinese sources from the 14th century. A person visited Mecca and then returned to China, and he reported that Muhammad was buried near the Zamzam well. So again, it's this kind of idea of pushing the idea of a mausoleum to kind of raise the status of a place.
Yeah, no, because let me see what else it says here. It says here that the visitation of the Prophet, or Ziyarat al-Nabi, the visitation of his sepulchre, grew over the centuries into an almost obligatory pilgrimage.
Yeah.
So obviously this was now a drawing competition to that of the Kaaba, so you've got the actual, let's say, quote unquote, body of Muhammad, where people can see a real thing, versus the Kaaba, which is a little rock in the middle of the desert.
Yeah. I think people kind of connect with something personal. There's something impersonal about Allah. There's something impersonal about the Kaaba. And so obviously the personal will always win out in the end. So communists missed a chance, but Chinese are smart. Okay, let's move on here. It seems that all Islamic regions before the Ottomans had their own pilgrimages. North Africa, Spain had their Kairouan. Just put up this second. In Tunis, and West Africa had his Timbuktu in modern Mali. Made a pilgrimage there. Yeah, there seems to be all over the place. Finally, it must be said that pilgrimage to the throne of Solomon is obviously a non-Arab pilgrimage of substitution in lieu of Mecca. Although the term Second Mecca is not used in the case of the throne, the tradition argues that there are two Meccas, but none of them is considered superior to the other. It must be said, actually, that the Mecca of the Persians is complementary to that of the Arabs, which is one way of sorting that out. So I think a lot of this is just absolutely blowing my mind, because I had this image of Islam up to a few days ago, which was that it was very much centralized around Mecca. And now we're discovering that it's actually decentralized into local shrines in a major way. So this is Turpan in China, essentially.
Well, last night I did a stream discussing Sharia, the development of the Sharia and the timeline. And few people seem to know, but it's well known from a scholarly point of view, because there's plenty of detailed papers on it.
Yeah.
But the Muslim scholars took a great deal from Plato and incorporated into their writings. Like the idea of the caliphate derives from Plato's Politeia, or his Republic. And not only that, they didn't interpret it straight out of Plato. They took it through the lens of the Neoplatonists. And don't forget, even Arius was a Neoplatonist, right? So they actually borrowed a lot of Greek philosophy and absorbed it into Islam. And
you know
this
where
is
they
not
had
discussed. Sorry?
You know where they had an academy, the Neoplatonists? It was in Haran.
No way. Where in Iran?
In Haran.
In Haran. Yes, of course.
So it kind of fits, and of course that's where the cult of Sen was as well. So the strange mixture of Neoplatonism and the cult of Sen kind of fits. I think Haran was hugely important in the first couple of 100 years of Islam.
The Sufis apparently write that they took from there. So in Haran, that grand mosque was previously a magical temple, was a university of magic and a temple of magic. And those people claim to have inherited the secrets of the Egyptian mystery schools. And the Sufis claim that they inherited all of those secrets of the Egyptian mystery school, as well as of the Hermetic schools. And then they took that knowledge, once the school was destroyed, they took that knowledge to Spain in the 9th century. That's the claim, apparently. So, this makes its way into Sufi Islam. So the whole Hermetical idea of Hermes Trismegistus and the Egyptian mystery school, so they claim to be the inheritors and the keepers of the original secrets. Wow. Supposedly.
Yeah. So it has a long history, well past the beginnings of Islam. They've funneled it. It's similar to what you said before about, ideas can be given and groups can be given different names, but essentially continue the same ideas down through the generations.
Yes.
Okay, so Turpan in China is the next focus here. Wait for it to come up. So you can imagine just from the location there how impossible it would be for most people to do a Hajj to Saudi Arabia in ancient times. But let's just see if we can. Okay, so why is this place important? It's they have their 7 Sleepers sanctuary there. Okay, I think of all of the things I've seen up to so far in the paper, I think this is a real giveaway, because as I mentioned in the blue box there, you have Pinocchio. No, really, you see these Buddhists fell asleep in a cave, and when they woke, Islam had taken over. That's literally the story they have associated with this cave. So they've taken the story, Christians fall asleep in the cave, and when they wake up, the pagan world has ended. Now Islam has taken it over, and they've replaced the Christians with Buddhists. And of course, the story has stuck. So the sanctuary of the people of the cavern, Ashab al-Kaf, known also as the Seven Sleepers Sanctuary, is situated in the vicinity of the oasis of Turfan. It's dedicated to 7 young men. Now it says here Christians, but I see later it says elsewhere Buddhists, according to the earliest rendering of the story. But Muslims in subsequent tradition, who were persecuted by the infidels and who found refuge in a cave where they remained asleep for years before waking up. The sanctuary was built upon an ancient Buddhist grave belonging to one of the most important Buddhist monastic complexes in the northern section of the Silk Roads, Many sanctuaries bearing the name of Ashab al-Kaf exist in northern Africa and in the Middle East, but the sanctuary in the oasis of Turfan is the furthest in Asia. The significance and popularity of it lies in the fact that this legend symbolizes the victory of Islam over the infidels. In Turfan, these latter identified as Buddhists in the same way that 7 teenagers, after waking from their sleep, found the pagan society replaced by Islam. So, with the miraculous awakening of the 7 symbolizing a kind of resurrection, tradition also recounts the victory of faith over death. The popularity of this legend is confirmed by the existence of Surah 18, blah, blah, blah. So, if I'm reading this correctly, they originally had a story about Christians falling asleep, same as the original. Eventually changed it to 7 Buddhists. Okay, and with this one, this place has become, since the 18th century, the major pilgrimage destination in eastern Turkestan, and a pilgrimage equated with that of Mecca. So once again, it's on par with Mecca. Okay. Okay. So we have definitely an example here of fabrication going on, where you're taking an old story and changing it for different needs. Now, what's interesting here, we have a case of the ulamas, which are the Islamic scholars and the historians, pushed back against this popular legend. In the 19th century, the Uyghur ulamas and historians disputed the tradition that it was at Tuyok that these 7 young men slept and were raised from the dead. Among the doubters, Musa Seyrami lists in his political history of eastern Turkestan several arguments showing that the cave never welcomed the 7 young sleepers. Seyrami furthermore denounces a popular belief according to which the place is a sanctuary equivalent to the Mecca temple. Now, what's interesting here is we have a rare example of Muslims pushing back against a runaway legend. But I think if we were to turn back the clock to the first centuries of Islam, there weren't these people that pushed back, or if they tried to push back, they probably were killed for questioning things. But he says some people argue that one pilgrimage performed at the cave can be equated with a half pilgrimage to Mecca, and 2 pilgrimages equivalent to a full pilgrimage, and thus the believer who do it is exempt for performing the pilgrimage. However, those who welcome such a belief will be declared damned, apostate, and infidels by the 4 juridical schools and in the community of Muslims. So that's how they stamp down on it.
That's interesting, because there's a book here that I've shown many times on my channel. It's called What is Commonly Spread but Not Proven from the Seerah of Prophet Muhammad, right? It's also called Famous but Unauthentic Stories from the Seerah of the Prophet Muhammad by Sheikh Muhammad bin Abdullah al-Ushan. So this lists a few dozen stories, about 3 dozen of almost 43 stories or something, about Mo that are known to be false and inauthentic but are popular. Like they admit openly, the story of the Jewish lady who threw garbage at the Prophet is a false narration. The Prophet carried the luggage of a Jewish lady who wished to escape from Mecca. This is an emotional but false narration, right? And they mention a bunch of it. Even they mention that the age of Khadija is clearly unknown, and that she was obviously not 40 years old, because she couldn't have 6 kids at the age of 40 at that point. She must have been 25. So as long as the story serves a good purpose, then it's okay in Islam. But if it's embarrassing in some way, then it needs to be stamped out.
Yeah, absolutely. I see Troy says convert to Islam or die. That seems to be it. The Greeks and Tocharians who lived in Turkestan converted to Mahayana Buddhism. Let me just put this up for a second. What is called today Chinese Buddhism in times of the Kushan Empire. Thanks for that. Now, nevertheless, the popularity of the sanctuary as a pilgrimage of substitution continued until the middle of the 20th century. For instance, a Tatar traveler was told in 1915 by the pilgrims who visited this shrine that If a man who has no strength to perform the Hajj makes a pilgrimage to it, he will be as meritorious as if he did the Hajj. The quality of the Mazar as a second Mecca of God is clearly affirmed also in a verse dedicated to the sanctuary in 1947. So it says clearly it is second Mecca of God. It is the travel place of those who are successful, and it is the paradise created by God. So these popular stories and legends persisted regardless of what the leaders said. Okay, so that's interesting, I think.
In the Encyclopedia of Islam, volume 11, they speak of a reproduction of the Kaaba, which was built near the little mausoleum of Khurasan Baba. So that's actually well known. It's set forth by the family as the second Mecca of the Kazakhs.
Yeah.
And they have other tombs as well that they revere. So this idea of multiple Meccas, of replicas, is not uncommon.
Yeah. It's just surprising that it's so little heard of, you know? It could be that because it's written off as it's a Sufi thing, but clearly it's not just a Sufi thing from what this paper suggested.
A few people are aware, but if you look at Al-Azhar University, the world's most important Islamic school, right, university, and school of theology, school of law, where they also churn out the most highly qualified imams, thousands of them, they teach the 4 schools of fiqh, but they also teach the 7 schools of Sufism, and which few people are aware of. They, alongside of fiqh, they teach Sufism, right, as the 7 schools. And then not only that, but the rector, the guy who runs the place, the guy who runs Al-Azhar, is himself a Sufi. The last guy before him was also a Sufi, and I'm willing to bet the guy before him was a Sufi.
Yeah.
Now, why is that? Because the Sufis combine the complete knowledge of Islam.
Yeah. Like, I think some Taoists often write off the Sufis as something distinct, a separate sect. From your understanding, the Sufis aren't separate. Would that be right? They are just like
no, the Sufis
higher
are
echelon.
completely beholden to the Sharia, and they just learn an additional level of spiritual knowledge, which is not given to the lay Muslims or the lower levels.
Yeah.
But they must first and foremost be properly Muslim, and
Yeah.
then they get the extra stuff.
Yeah. Okay. Right. I'm just waiting for it to load up again. Sorry, 1 second. No, it's a bit slow here. Okay, so this is another place, Nakhchivan. Okay, it's as you can see there, it's just south of Armenia. I don't know if it's actually in Armenia itself, but north of Tabriz. Okay. And sorry that the internet is so slow here. Adiz there 411 says my sheikh was Sufi. So they do tend to take high positions, don't they, generally, because of the superior knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
So that's not the only Ashab al-Kaf. It is worth mentioning finally that there is another sanctuary, yes, a 7 sleepers cave, if you like, in the western extremity of Central Asia, namely in the Caucasus. This sanctuary, locally named Asaf Kef, established near Hesha Park or Hesha Parak in the Nakhchivan province of Azerbaijan, is visited annually by thousands of devotees and plays a similar role to that of the Tuyok shrine, but it does so in an area dominated by Shiism. So this is just to show that it's not just a Sufi thing. It's not just another kind of strange sect. It's very much part of Shiism as well. According to the Shia population of the village where the shrine is located, a pilgrimage to it is equivalent to pilgrimage to the tomb of Hussein, the son of Ali, at Karbala. This latter being the greatest Shiite pilgrimage. The Shiite character of the sanctuary is strengthened by an oral tradition telling that Imam Ali visited the place and prayed there, and that a footprint of his horse is still visible. Okay, so they're saying that this place is equivalent to the tomb of Hussein. So that is the top important shrine of Shia. So it's very surprising that it's given that same level, really. It's also that. Just waiting for it to come on. Yeah, Erkin has corrected me. It's in Azerbaijan, not Armenia. I did say it was, I think it's south of Armenia, but I wasn't sure if it was in the country or not. So thanks for correcting me there. Okay, so we have an image there of the Kaaba. But if you Google the name Hesh Parak, Mecca is given. I don't know why that is the case, but Google has equated, even Google has equated the terms Hesh Parak and Mecca. So you can look that up. If you put in that place in Google, you'll get Mecca as the place given, which is hilarious, I think. Okay. So sorry about the delay. Let's wait for the slide to change again. Okay, although the legend regarding the coming of these imams in eastern Turkestan to Islamize the region is a popular forgery, this tradition was strongly cultivated among the population and became a guiding principle in many hagiographies. Now, I went straight to the red box and forgotten what the bit was about. This is the mausoleum of Imam Jafar Sadiq. Okay, so not surprisingly, the mausoleum, which is attributed to Imam Jafar Sadiq, the most renowned Shia Imam, and a major reference in Sufism, is the most revered in the oasis. Okay, so this is, as you can see, it's sort of northeastern of Kyrgyzstan. Let's go on to the next bit. Okay. However, it is only in the 18th century that the shrine started to be famous as the destination for a pilgrimage of substitution in lieu of visitation to Mecca. In one of his verses dedicated to Jafar Sadiq, as well as in his travelogue, the Turkish poet and Sufi Muhammad Dalili depicts the place in the first decades of the 18th century as the Mecca of the Persians, the same expression that is used in the case of Throne of Solomon in the Fergana Valley. There is no doubt that this expression bears a similar signification at Khotan, that is to say, a Mecca for the non-Arabs. Okay, and there's his verse. So let's read a little bit. I came without doubt, saying, "Let's do the Hajj at the Mecca of the Persians." Okay, so we can see that the idea of having a Mecca of the foreigners is prevalent all over the place. In the 19th century, Musa Seyrami reports that along with the sanctuary of the Ashab al-Kaf at Turfan, the mausoleum of Jafar Sadiq is equated to that of the Kaaba at Mecca by the Muslim population. Seyrami adds that the Jafar was consequently honored as a second Jafar and his grave highly venerated. Let me just see what I've left out here. His hypothesis is that a very devout Sunni Sufi sheikh called Jafar, and regarded as a great religious guide by the local community, became so renowned as to be compared with the famous Jafar Sadiq. And Seyrami adds that this Jafar was consequently honored as the second Jafar and his grave highly venerated. I don't know any of these people. I'm sure it might make some sense to someone out there. Do these names ring a bell for you?
No, to be honest.
Okay.
No.
But I think the key idea is that they are treating these places as on a par with Mecca. Alika has said that the throne of Solomon is also near a big water hole. These stations seem just to be watering places which people at the time fought for. It makes sense. They could add religious significance to it. So another place, the Great Mazar of Nia, is visited by thousands of pilgrims coming from everywhere in Xinjiang, or Xinjiang, do you know how to pronounce that? Xinjiang, as well as from remote provinces of northern China, such as Gansu, Ningxia, and Qinghai. I'm sorry for murdering so many different words. It's not my talent to be able to pronounce words, unfortunately. Okay. So according to the local tradition reported by two Uyghur writers, a threefold pilgrimage to this tomb is considered an equivalent to the Hajj. So there's no consistency. Sometimes it's 2 visits is the same. Sometimes 1 visit, sometimes 3. So it varies from place to place. The entire Sufi tradition has pointed then to the heart, which once awakened by deep devotion and spiritual exercise may replace the Kaaba. The Persian Sufi Abdul Rahman Jami writes that one heart is better than 1,000 Kaabas. The 17th century Turkish poet Durun Abdul states that the Kaaba of the believers is the house of the heart. Have you heard that idea in your researches, the idea of the heart being equivalent to a Kaaba?
You know, it vaguely rings a bell, but I cannot give you anything right now.
Yeah. What I've heard is that what some of them do is they walk around each other, considering that if the Kaaba is of the heart, then you become a Kaaba, and essentially you can be the focal point of circumambulation.
That is so weird.
Yeah. It's almost like it's kind of like deifying oneself ultimately. That's what it comes down to.
Yeah, that's a little woke. I mean, that's just kind of like, huh?
Yeah. You know, it's kind of interesting that a lot of Western people who've got into Far Eastern mysticism tend to kind of almost put themselves on a pedestal. You know, they have this kind of, it's all about themselves, you know.
But this just says, though, that, look, here's evidence, right? We may not know exactly what it means, but we realize this is not consistent with the standard narrative that we've been given, that Islam is square and it's like this, and it tastes like chicken, and it's very, very predictable, and it's pure and perfect. We're seeing here that I mean, this thing is manufactured. How the sausage was made is definitely, it's made of pork. You know, we're starting to find this is not made of out of pristine chicken, right? This is made of pork. It's not made of halal ingredients, and it tells us there are practices here and things here that are just outside of what Islam is supposed to be. So do we ignore this and reject this, or do we go like what's going on here, and let's look further?
Yeah. Mansur al-Hallaj, who died in 922, considered that the Kaaba as a physical artifact could be equated with the human corpse, and then that its symbol ought to be spiritually destroyed. Otherwise expressed, the mental image of the Kaaba has to be eradicated by the Sufi who search how to go beyond the external aspect of the Meccan temple in order to perform a spiritual Hajj only. So this guy was Persian mystic poet and teacher of Sufism. So there seems to be in a kind of trying to get deeper into the symbolism behind it, to the point where they just realize that it's a redundant location. It doesn't mean anything other than what you make of it in your heart. Okay. So this is an interesting quote here that towards the end, the bigot goes to Mecca, but the dervish goes to Khurasan. However, in addition to the cult of the idolized Kaaba hidden in their heart, Sufis embrace the idea of building their own Kaaba. We know that members of certain, usually antinomian Sufi trends decided to construct their own physical Kaaba district from that located in Mecca. It is known, for instance, that Hallaj, after returning from Mecca, built a small Kaaba at Baghdad, in his private oratory and circumambulated it with other believers. Hajj is well renowned in Central Asia and frequently quoted in the poetry of Ahmed Yassawi, one of the great Sufi poets of the region. The views of the Sufi of Baghdad have certainly inspired the mystical milieu, as is demonstrated below. Similarly, in 15th century Anatolia, the group of Abdal Sufis directed by Otman Baba used every year at the time of Kurban Bayram, or the festival of sacrifice, to perform a pilgrimage known as the Greater Hajj at one of its mother lodges, namely at Sayyid Ghazi in central Anatolia. In the eyes of these dervishes, this pilgrimage might replace the pilgrimage to Mecca. Again, moreover, the Turkish Sufis close to the Abdal movement claim that their geographical origin is Khorasan in eastern Iran, a very important region in the history of Sufism, and that it is towards this region alone that they must travel for pilgrimage. Okay, so different views there. So they're basically putting Khorasan as being way more important than Mecca. And so they actually have a second Qibla as a result. There is a major Sufi sanctuary in Central Asia that was depicted as a second Qibla. The Sufi view about the link between the Kaaba and the Qibla is well explained by Al-Hujwiri, who says the outward Qibla being the Kaaba and the inward Qibla being the throne of God, by which is meant the mystery of divine contemplation. So, make that as you will. So the idea is that ultimately the direction you're praying is all about contemplation of God, which seems less bad than just praying towards a cube. Any thoughts on that?
I'm just finding that just to mention here in Encyclopedia of Islam, the Bektashis often settled in famous places of pilgrimage and explaining the sanctity of the latter in conformity with their own traditions. And they mentioned Sayyid Ghazi, Eskeshehir, and in several places in Albania as well. And they speak of the miracles described in the legends of the Sufi saints have often conserved shamanistic features. Because it's interesting that if you look for Islamic saints, you come up with Sufi saints. The saints of Islam are Sufis.
Yeah.
Now, wouldn't that be odd? You'd think you'd have like regular non-Sufi saints, but you don't.
No.
And so they speak of miracles of the Sufis. And here's another reference to Sayyid Ghazi. And they speak of Mehmet Beg, son of Sayyid Ghazi. So that's the name of a person. Sayyid Ghazi is the name of a person. And it was, okay. Okay, so there is some history about this, a little bits about it. So, I mean, I would need more time to go through this and see if there's anything obvious about it.
Yeah. Okay. So from the Kaaba of Khorasan to the Kaaba of Turkestan, let me just see if I can have a look through this. Right, we'll just focus on the bit at the bottom. The present day, a site of devotion for Sufis and non-Sufis alike. Nowadays, according to the locals, 2 pilgrimages to Hamadani's tomb equal a single journey to Mecca. So that's just another example of how it's varied from place to place. Sometimes it's worth 2, sometimes worth 3, sometimes it's equal. And it's really down to the local opinion how important a place is relative to Mecca. It's funny how you can it's almost like they have like a mental scales where they weigh, they value the mystical value of a place, and they go, oh, this is worth 3, or this is worth 2, or it's
it's really, there must be some sort of magical significance to that.
Yeah.
Sort of Gematria style.
Yeah. In the 16th century, the mausoleum of Ahmed Yassawi, one of the most renowned disciples of Yusuf Hamadani, was in turn depicted as a Kaaba. Okay, so again, we have a mausoleum depicted as a Kaaba, and for many people, pilgrimage to the Kaaba of Turkestan evidently might serve as a substitute for pilgrimage to Mecca. Okay, I think we're kind of making the point that there are a lot of these places, and they are acting as substitutes for Mecca. What I'm finding remarkable, we are an hour and 20 minutes in, and so far I haven't seen any Muslim come on board and correct us and say we're making stuff up or that we're wrong in any way or trying to explain it. So if there's any Muslims watching, perhaps you can explain what is going on here. The shrine of Ahmed Yasawi is also a second Qibla. An article about the city of Turkestan, blah, 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 says that to regard the shrine as a second Qibla. The author of the article quotes the following verse attributed to Ahmed Yasawi: Muhammad is at Medina and Hajjs Ahmed at Turkestan. Thus, the eponym of the Yasawi order is presented as the Muhammad of Central Asia. So that's quite a thing. This verse, undated, is very popular among the population of Central Asia and frequently quoted in post-Soviet Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, and even Turkmenistan. So they're equating this guy, let me see, Hajjs Ahmed as a kind of equivalent to Muhammad. So we have a replica Muhammad for Central Asia now. It gets weirder and weirder. So the whole thing, Lloyd, is very fluid. There's nothing fixed here. Anything can be duplicated, changed, added, seems.
And so this was changing and changing and changing over time. Different people. I mean, now, could we legitimately say, like, for instance, this was like a heresy, right? Like you could say Arianism was a heresy, or is this the fact that Islam was very fluid, as you say? I mean, or is this an element that we don't understand the context fully? Because there's lots of Sufi references here. There are references to doctrines we're not aware of. And I mean, is this something that is outside of the basic principles of Islam that we are familiar with as the standard narrative?
Yeah. Well, like if you looked at somewhere like Medina, they had loads and loads of mausoleums associated with Muhammad and his family. All the characters in the story all had their mausoleum in Medina, and they existed up to the early part of the 20th century. Now they've all of them have been destroyed apart from Muhammad's one. So the mere fact that that existed in Medina would suggest that this is mainstream stuff. This is not just something marginal. So just going on from there, another article in Shura entitled Kalvat, the word in this context denoting the particular pilgrimage which is performed at the grave of Ahmed Yasawi, details the numerous rituals executed there due to the intense commercial and devotional activities observable during Kalvat. The writer compares the city of Turkestan with Mecca during the month of Dhul Hijjah, that is to say, the Hajj period. Although the shrine has remained a Kaaba for the ascetics, i.e., Kaaba of the heart, pilgrimage to the shrine has come over the Soviet period down to the present day to function as a substitution for pilgrimage to the Temple of Mecca. People in present-day Kazakhstan hold that a double visit to the tomb of Yasawi is as efficacious as a single Hajj to Mecca. The shrine is also considered as a Kaaba and a little Mecca. So that's even more evidence to the same. Okay, So we also, in addition to all of these copycat Kaabas, replica Meccas, second Qiblas, and duplication of circumambulation, we also have a second Muhammad as such here. Baha al-Din, Naqshband, and the Black Stone. Alongside Ahmed Yasawi, the other major great figure of Sufism in Central Asia is Baha al-Din, who died in 1389. Let me see. And who became the most powerful Sufi lineage in the whole of Asia, from Turkey to China and Indonesia. His tomb, located in the vicinity of Bukhara, at a place popularly known as Kasiri Arifan, was the fountainhead of the order and another major pilgrimage destination in Central Asia, drawing thousands from areas as far as India and China. According to the Hungarian traveller uh, Arminius van Berry in 1863, Baha al-Din was venerated as the national saint of Turkestan and as a second Muhammad by the pilgrims. The main ritual performed at his mausoleum was to circumambulate his four-cornered grave and to touch or kiss a sacred black stone engraved in one of its corner. All these practices echoed those of the obligatory Hajj pilgrimage at Mecca, when the pilgrims, while circumambulating the Kaaba, touch and kiss the irregular black oval placed at the northeast corner of the building. That is the famous black stone. So what we have now is an imitation not only of the circumambulation, and also imitation of Muhammad, like a second prophet figure. We also have the use of a black stone in pretty much the same type of ritual as you find with the Hajj at the Kaaba.
Well, imitation, I mean, is something that is integral to Islam.
Yeah.
But I mean, you made me think of something else alongside this. So tell me what you think, because I mean, this is, yeah, I mean, this is all what you're saying is all new to me. So it's like hard to, what do you say of it? What do you say about it? But can I mention something? So you've got Plotinus, right? Have you heard of a scholar called Plotinus, a Greek pagan?
Rings a vague bell. I couldn't tell you much about him, but it's
Okay, so this
I'm
so
familiar
here's
with.
something. You spoke of another source of Muhammad, a second Muhammad. So
Yeah.
Al-Farabi is a very poor, little known scholar in Islam, but very, very important, right? Now, he took from Plato, took the Plato's Republic and incorporated that into the whole idea of the caliphate, right? How to make the perfect state. And to make the perfect state, you have to take over the whole world. You have to run the entire world and control it so that you can have perfection. You cannot have outliers, right? Now, here's a brief thing. Plotinus. Plotinus was a pagan. His student is called Porphyry, and Porphyry despised Christianity, right? His writings were widely read and accepted within Augustine of Hippo's time. That's the 5th century. This was 200 years before Mo, right?
Yeah.
Now, Al-Farabi borrowed political ideas from Plotinus, but he also borrowed other things, many other things, including Plotinus basically had a concept of the one, the monad, right? The Gnostic monad that is effectively identical to that of Allah, right?
Yeah.
But also, notice here, Porphyry writes, so Porphyry is a student of Plotinus, his major disciple, and he writes an account called Vita Plotini of Plotiny's life. And he says, Plotinus lived a divine life. He was more than an ordinary man. He had a divine nature. He possessed every possible virtue. He had the highest moral and spiritual standards. Does this sound like Momo a little bit so far?
Yeah.
His teachings were regarded as a legitimate continuation of the Platonic tradition, just like Muhammad's teachings are considered a legitimate continuation of the Abrahamic tradition.
Yeah.
And Plotinus was a paradigm of philosophical perfection, right? And notice to Plotinus, to him, phenomenon were a poor image of mimicry of something higher and intelligible, which was the truer part of genuine being. Okay, so that's a long blah, blah, blah. But Plotinus refused to have his portrait painted.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Isn't that
that's
odd? Sorry?
yeah. That's very odd. That is very similar to Islam's approach to Muhammad.
Correct. So,
Yeah.
so in my thinking, when you look at how much Al-Farabi took, right, from these people, from these Gnostics, from Plotinus, Neoplatonists, and incorporated slap bang into Islam,
Hmm.
this tells me we've got a model here for Muhammad, taken from Plotinus, because Plotinus's version of Allah or of God, the Creator, is identical to Allah.
Yeah, and it's so strong in Muslim argumentation about the Trinity that it has to have a lot of historicity behind it, or antiquity behind it. It
Yeah.
seems like integral. Yeah.
So I mean, there's things that we don't know about Islam that they've taken ideas from somewhere, and once you start to find the source of the idea, things start to like make a little sense, you know?
Yeah. So that shrine that I just mentioned, they have a black stone at the corner, same as in the Kaaba. And strange enough, it was known as the Stone of Desire. Does that sound very much like, the kind of the sexual kind of imagery
I was
of
about to
the?
think, why it's just odd they didn't call it sexual chocolate.
Yeah, it might as well. Yeah, yeah. Um, they rubbed their foreheads against the stone. They believed that if they had any sort of health problems on their forehead, that this would help. So it's all very, very strange and derivative, I suppose, but kindly. So I like we're literally ticking off every sort of emblem that we can think of to do with Islam in terms of Mecca. We've got the black stone, we've got the Kaaba, we've got circumambulation, we've kissing the black stone. It's all there. So 3 visits to Baha al-Din's grave is the same as 1 visit to Mecca. So this belief evidently continued through the Soviet period despite the prohibition of tomb veneration and the circulation of Marxist and anti-religious propaganda. A French traveller in 1985, for instance, was told by the locals at the shrine that 3 visits to it replaced the pilgrimage to Mecca. So it's very hard to get rid of these beliefs once they're ingrained. Is it anything different from elsewhere in Islam? Okay, so we're almost there. We've about a dozen or so slides left. There are at least 3 shrines that claim a piece of the black stone. So we have the first shrine is the Baxter of Khwaja Abi Garam, and is one of the main sanctuaries of Turkestan. And there are 2 other shrines in Central Asia. So there's basically 3 shrines that have a black stone element to it, apart from what's in Mecca. So that's quite a lot. I doubt that they're all taking elements of the original black stone. They probably are just using any old black stone. Yeah. Okay, let's wait for the next bit. According to legend, the place where the shrine stands was visited by Abu Talha, a comrade in arms of the Prophet Muhammad, and by the Prophet himself. A slab of black stone resembling that of the Kaaba was subsequently erected upon an earthen mound at the site of the visitation. The second such shrine is the tomb of Al-Yambua in the valley of Furqana, which was presented with a piece of black stone by some pilgrims returning from Mecca. The black stone of the Kaaba is without any doubt one of the most suggestive symbols to remind visitors of the sanctity of Mecca, and there are probably many other sanctuaries in the rest of the Muslim world similarly claiming to possess fragments of it. What do you think of the idea that they might have taken fragments of the black stone from Mecca? Does that
Very
sound?
unlikely. I'm just thinking they just made it up.
Yeah, it's just complete forgery and making things up, and it's just what we've seen again and again right through the history of Islam, sadly.
I mean, this tells us that exaggeration and embellishment is just part and parcel.
It is, yeah. It's in the blood of the population. Let me see. What did I want to share here? In the 12th century, both the Mubayidi trend, people in white raiment, a Shia movement responsible for many campaigns to convert the non-Muslims of Asia, and the Yasawi Brotherhood were particularly fascinated by the Kaaba and by the idea that this edifice also had its place in the heart of Asia. This attests to how prominent a role the symbol of the Kaaba played in their respective religious activities. Some examples will make the point clearer. Hagiographies report, for instance, that during the Friday prayer, Ahmed Yawawi was often miraculously present at 2 places by location, namely the mosque of his native city in Turkestan and at the Kaaba. On a further occasion, he's supposed to have traveled to the Kaaba riding a cloud, which makes a nice variation from riding a burak. You have to give them credit for giving us a variation on it. Another group of narratives relate the miracles performed by the Mubayidi leaders. the most astonishing of which was to bring the Kaaba from Mecca to Central Asia. This miracle was executed generally to impress the infidels or the newly converted. Or in the 8th century, for instance, the figure Ishaq Bab converted a Christian king to Islam, and to mark the occasion, he built at Kargalik in the region of Kashgar a mosque resembling the Kaaba. So a lot of these stories are made up in order to convert people and convince them of amazing, miraculous events. Feel free to come in on any of that if anything strikes you.
No, it's just,
No,
I mean,
it's
it's
a
just
lot.
the fact that the Sufis, yeah, it's a lot. It's all new, but the fact that
Yeah.
it's Sufis again and magical rituals and the Sufis doing magic.
Yeah, and by location would fit in nicely with that whole magic thing. So the fascination with the Kaaba spread into the northern parts of Central Asia and even among the Tartars of southern Siberia. From several genealogical documents, we know that Islam was introduced into the region by Mubayyidi Bab and Yasawi sheikhs. For instance, a pilgrimage to a mausoleum attributed to Hakim Atta in the city of, I think it's Baisha, is regarded as a pilgrimage of substitution in lieu of Mecca. If you perform the tawaf, it is noted in a manuscript dated 1717. It has the same quality as if performed at Mecca. This historical fact is confirmed by the oral tradition telling that 7 pilgrimages to the tomb are equivalent to the Hajj. Besides, tawaf is still performed around the grave. So it's interesting
Doesn't this say that this is a completely different culture and mindset, a completely different kind of thinking? I mean,
yeah,
I don't think someone is going to say, hey, my garden, if you march around my garden, it's the same as visiting the Vatican in Rome, or it's the same as visiting the the Mount of Olives or something.
yeah,
I mean, it's not something that's possible of to Western thinking or to Christian thinking.
yeah,
But they've got all these numbers 3 times, 6 times, 7 times. I mean, these numbers must have some kind of
yeah,
magical significance. And you're
yeah,
dealing with a culture that clearly thinks in a way that we don't understand. We need to appreciate what it is they're doing in the context so that we can interpret this correctly. Because to us, it's just a random number, but they must be basing this on another principle that we don't know yet.
yeah, yeah. I'm sure there's a financial side to it as well. If you can say that you need to do 7 pilgrimages, obviously that's going to bring in a lot more money than if you say,
Actually,
well,
that's
one
a
is.
pretty good reason.
It's a cynical one, but it could be a reason behind why they didn't just say, well, it's equal to.
Look at the Zamzam water. What do they charge for that stuff? People take liters of it home with them. And I
Yeah,
mean, the stuff's not coming from the well, it's coming from the ocean.
yeah. This is crazy. Yeah. They don't seem to have inherited the Christian idea that selling things like that is form of simony. So they must have that part must have just missed them. Um,
Wow.
okay, yeah. So we're almost there. Another few slides. It's quite a big paper. I'll try to get all the key elements of it.
Yeah, next time try to highlight the important
Yeah,
points. Also, you see you've got this really tiny black speck in the middle of a big white page.
yeah.
It's actually possible to enlarge that to fill the entire page.
I know I did a poor job with it now. Mea culpa. Let me see. Is there anything there that's stands out? I'll skip that bit. Okay, let's skip that one. That's not. Yeah, I think that's about bringing the Kaaba from Mecca to the city of Ozgent. So it's another example of crazy stuff going
So you
on.
know what? If they were all competing to be Mecca, maybe it meant that Mecca wasn't that special because I mean, there was a fight on. It's like, look, Jerusalem's Jerusalem. There's no argument. You
Yeah,
can't suddenly say, well, I'm starting a new Jerusalem in Kansas City, and
yeah,
everyone goes, okay, well, we will buy into that. I mean, no.
yeah,
Whereas in Islam, it looks like everyone went like, you know what? We'll make a knockoff Mecca right here. Bring your money, come and do your pilgrimage. Everyone's like, yeah, we'll do that. Isn't
yeah,
that odd?
yeah. It's equivalent to like the difference between having like a caliph versus having a local imam. It's almost like they don't. Do you see the analogy? It's kind of like they can see it as just like the local imam.
Yeah, it's like saying
Where,
if you visit the local Imam twice, it's like
yeah,
having seen Muhammad once. You're like,
yeah,
no,
yeah,
like it doesn't make sense. It's like how
yeah,
are these people thinking?
yeah. I'd imagine it's just a practical thing. This is where religion meets practicality. That it would just financially, practically be impossible for the majority of people to ever
Yeah,
go
but
there.
then the thing is, you're still trying to please everybody, and you're stretching the rules to please
Yeah,
them rather than being practical and honest.
yeah, yeah. I think it came down to the fact that they just you have like a pile of people there believe that this is and this the doing the Hajj is a religious duty, and yet they're not physically or financially able to do it. So you have to bend the rules to allow it to happen somehow. And as long as you have a local religious leader say, yeah, that's equal to that, rest assured, the people say, well, that's all I wanted to hear. That's fine. That suits me, you know. And why would you argue it? It's certainly in their interest to go to the local one rather than traipsing across thousands of miles through desert. Um, just to wrap up here, to conclude, it seems there are two major reasons for the proliferation in Central Asia of sanctuaries accorded the name of Second Mecca, etc. The first of these is the desire by non-Arabs um, living far from the Hijaz to identify a local Mecca substitute towards which they may perform a version of the Hajj and thus fulfill one of the five compulsory duties of Islam. The second one is the desire to build impressive sanctuaries equivalent or comparable to that of Mecca, with which to honor particular exceptional Central Asian spiritual figures. Following the work of Catherine Mayer Yahuin, we of course know that such substitutes for Mecca exist in the rest of the Muslim world, in Bulgaria and Northern Africa, for example, and that around the world pilgrimages to saintly tombs all function more or less as substitute pilgrimages in lieu of the Hajj. So I think that's
Mm.
absolutely major. It was a mystery to me why, first of all, that there were mausoleums, and yet the Hadiths had said that Muhammad had banned uh, such a thing. So that was a bit of a mystery. Now it makes sense. So you've had a situation where there's a tension across the Muslim world between the idea, on the one hand, Mecca's must is supposed to be the and end all of everything, and yet the majority of Muslims are disregarding that and saying that their local place is more important or just as important. Um, but if the phenomenon is universal in the Muslim world, Central Asia is nevertheless unusual in the sheer number of Meccas or Kaabas of substitution which we find located there. I think that's the key thing. There are a
Yeah,
lot of them. Um, um,
I mean,
these
because it's
sanctuaries.
almost like Central Asia was trying to become a replacement Mecca, like they thought they could replace Mecca, supersede
Mhm,
Mecca.
yeah, if they only had like a religious figure that had a teaching, a book um, equivalent to the Quran, I'm sure they would have gone with that and just dropped the old religion. I'd say it was probably very close to that. In fact, there is, as I mentioned, a place in Senegal where that has already happened. It's just surprising it hasn't happened more often. Um, so it mentions here about the fact that there was even instances of a person being treated as a second Muhammad. Um, To these figures, Ahmed Yessawi and Baha al-Din, are personalities depicted as similar to that of the Prophet, that is to say, as instances of a second Muhammad. Okay. We know, for instance, that the tomb of Baha al-Din acquired an international aura, functioning as a destination for pilgrims from the Tartar rural area, from India, and even from China. Um,
So these are Sufis. Now, the way for a Sufi to achieve what's called the Insan al-Kamal, to become the perfected man or the perfect man, is to purify yourself with lots and lots of these precise rituals that you do, and you go through these various stations. Like there's one called the station of the annihilation, and there's various stations you go through to purify yourself, and eventually you enter through the veil into the throne room of Allah, and you become perfected because Allah's essence flows into you directly.
yeah.
And so this means that they achieved this magical feat if they became a second Muhammad, because Muhammad was the guy that left the path. He was the first to achieve this,
Yeah,
and people follow his example precisely because they want to achieve what he did, which was to literally become the essence of Allah. I mean, so
yeah,
there's a magical aspect to these guys becoming other Muhammads, because what Muhammad did was achievable.
yeah. It goes on to say that at shrines with a strong association with the Temple of Mecca, there's often a broom present with which to clean the Kaaba, as well as a tradition that the Zamzam well is located nearby. By means of such symbols, the identification of the sanctuary with the Temple of Mecca may be strengthened. Now, the Kaaba, or sorry, the broom idea, that to me, as I often associate brooms with witches and so forth. Um, I wonder if there is a magical element to it, or is it just a symbolic cleaning of the Kaaba? So that I find interesting.
No idea.
Um, no. Okay, let's go on. I'm going to finish with an image of the Kaaba in Kazakhstan in a few minutes. Let me just see if there's anything else. Um, the climax of such identification is thus reached when a full copy of the Kaaba is built, in the contemporary world at least, an exceptional practice instanced only at the Kazakh steppe near the shrine of Khurasan Atta. Finally, several Sufis have found the ziyarat to certain exceptional tombs to be superior to the Hajj insofar as, due to the charisma and spirituality of the saint buried there, these tombs constituted manifestations of an inner real Kaaba. Let me just see if I can get to show you the.
I just find this term ziyarat like ziggurat, because the ziggurat was the
Yeah,
temple, and on top of the temple they did the ceremonies. So it's just kind of weird, you know.
yeah. So finally, we get to the Kazakhstan object. They have a Kaaba, and it's basically a replica of the Kaaba in Mecca. And I think that is a clear indication of the fact that they are definitely copying. It isn't just a coincidence. They are trying to imitate and make their own Kaaba in their own area. Um, like there is a song in Ireland called "We'll Have Our Own Las Vegas in the Hills of Donegal." It's a quite a popular song from years ago, and it seems like the similar sentiment existed right across Central Asia. They'll have their own Las Vegas. They'll have their own Mecca in their part of the world. You know, so that is that Kaaba, and I think that's it. I think that's where I finished it.
I mean,
Good.
you don't see Christians trying to replicate Jerusalem everywhere.
No, it's certainly unique to Islam. I would say the nearest thing I can think of to it is perhaps the Stations of the Cross, where Christians in a church um, prayerfully remember the crucifixion of Jesus. So they go around and think of the different episodes, a bit like what we saw with the stations, but without a Gnostic element to it. It's just purely trying to imagine what Jesus went through in a kind of a spiritual way. But there's no attempt to rebuild Jerusalem elsewhere or do mock-ups that I can think of.
Yeah, which is really, I mean, clearly there's something going on in the brain here that we are not familiar with, that we don't appreciate and understand.
Yeah.
And, so we may be misinterpreting some of this because we don't quite understand the thinking that's going on here.
Yeah. That's always the way. That there's always something behind it. I think the numbers thing that you mentioned, like what the significance of 1, 2, 3, and 7, it doesn't. Those are significant straight off. They don't seem to mention 4 or 5. They don't mention 8. Don't mention 9.
Yeah, the number 40 is of significance. Like Muhammad was 40 when he got revelation. Khadija was 40. These are all Alibaba and the 40 thieves. These are significant magical numbers.
Yeah. Unfortunately, that's an area that I don't know much about. I'm sure you'd have to go deep into the whole the general world of Gnosticism and magic and so forth to I'm sure
Yeah, the
there are
Shia are
lots of,
probably closer to this than the Sunnis. The Sunnis do practice, but the Shia seem to be steeped up to it in up to the hilt. Basically, the Shia seem to really be much more open about it.
yeah. And I wonder why the Sunnis didn't get into it. Is it just that
I
it's
think
like a
they do. They're just
divergent
less
school?
obvious about it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So that is it, really. Any thoughts, just as you mentioned it there, and any thoughts when you think the whole Shia and Sunni divide occurred? Do you think it was something like the 8th to 9th century? Do you think it was earlier or
Apparently, it was
later?
quite early on because of Ali, right? Because
Yeah,
they wanted Ali to succeed Muhammad, and
yeah,
everyone else wanted someone who has the right characteristics to succeed Muhammad, so anyone could. And I think it
yeah,
was more like a power struggle.
yeah,
So it seemed to have been quite early on, within the late
yeah,
7th century then. I
yeah,
mean, look, we don't know, but according to that narrative, assuming
yeah,
it's around Ali, then yes.
yeah,
But,
yeah.
but
I just don't
the
know if I don't know if I can trust the historicity of that story or not. I'm kind of torn, particularly when looking into the figure of Ali and others. It didn't seem to fully stack up. The dates seem to be out and so on, but maybe there is something to it. The other thing is the Shiism didn't exist in Iran initially. It was Sunniism was there, and then Shiism took over. Am I right in saying that? That's how I understand it.
I don't know. To be honest, I don't know
Yeah,
enough.
yeah.
But
So I'm just kind of curious how that whole shift moved. How does a whole region suddenly switch from one to the other, and then the traditions somehow are retained? Do you know what I mean? But I'll have to. That's an area I definitely need to look into a lot more.
yeah, but I mean, we are starting to dwell right off the beaten track, Mal. I mean, this
Yeah.
is way outside of the Quran says on chapter 9:5 on page 31, hadith number 4, that Muhammad picked his nose with an ajwa stick. You know,
Yeah.
we're not in Kansas anymore, Mal, to
No,
mix the meat.
we've gone off. We've gone down the rabbit hole. We've joined Alice in Wonderland with the Mad Hatter and all the rest of it. Yeah.
You know, because yeah, man, this is starting to. I mean, this opens up a whole new can of worms. Now, the thing is, you're showing a scholarly paper, right? Which is based in fact, it's based in geography, based in history,
Yeah.
based in architecture, based in archaeology, right?
Yeah.
Now, the scholars know this stuff. My question is, why haven't they connected the obvious dots
Yeah. Yeah.
and come to the obvious conclusion that there's something going on here?
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, that this paper, this is the frustrating thing. You know, people sometimes say, "Well, why don't you write a paper?" Well, why? To have it doing the same thing as this paper until quite recently that no one reads because it's an academic paper. It's heavy going, and he doesn't make it obvious what the implications really of all of this is. You know, he kind of leads you so far, and then he kind of leaves you with it and gone, okay, good luck now. That's all I've
That's
got
what
to
I've
say.
come across. I've said this. They come to a
Yeah,
certain point, they don't connect the dots, and it's obvious where the dots lead, but the scholar is like, well, I don't want to get stabbed in my office by an angry, not a
yeah,
real Muslim. So
yeah, yeah. Like you could actually, it'd be interesting to kind of chart the movements of all of these sort of replications. So you kind of have maybe start. I would argue, and I think you would argue as well. It started with Jerusalem, and then dot dot dot. Then you have Mecca. Then Mecca is duplicated in these various places in Central Asia, and then you have it in
yeah.
Kazakhstan. You have all of this going on.
There's an interesting comment that says they take from Moses 40 days, 40 years, 40 nights, which is actually really interesting. So they take it from Judaism, which is interesting because Thaddeus said what we're missing now is is the mystical element. Who because he Thaddeus says to his mind, he thinks there's one more element, that Muhammad was a mystic. Whoever
Mm.
this Muhammad template was a mystic.
Yeah,
Or at least one of the people, that this composite that makes up Muhammad was a mystic, and we're missing that mystic bit. Once we
yeah,
find that, we'll have like this whole.
yeah. Well, it's interesting. The Targum's Pseudo Jonathan makes it abundantly clear that in Judaism, there was a definite sort of area in terms of the function of the priest of the temple, that magic was part of it. Now, what sense it was, whether it was in the kind of dark sense or in the or that's maybe a turn of phrase, but um, they certainly saw that the priests had all of these functions. So I think if you're dealing with a hybrid religion in the early days between Judaism and Christianity, I can see how they could have drawn from Judaism that kind of Gnostic magic stuff,
Yeah.
however confused it was, and then went off in different on different tangents with it.
Yeah.
Was still retaining some of the early stuff, but
Well, you've got comments disappearing from your chat all the time.
really,
Yeah, I'm looking at it and I'm seeing comments just, at least it's disappearing for me, but there are
wow.
comments just constantly disappearing out of your chat.
I wonder, is there someone in the head office of YouTube that might be a Muslim watching this and going, "Oh no, we're not having that."
No, I've seen at least a dozen comments disappear. As I'm looking, I've
Yeah,
seen constantly. I mean, at least for me,
yeah,
it's these comments are
yeah.
disappearing.
That would be worrying now. I know I'm as everyone I'm sure knows, I'm way too busy to be going deleting comments mid flow. I don't think there was any moderators in the chat
No,
that's been deleting anything. So that is strange.
yeah, no, I saw at one point like 10 comments, or like several comments disappear, like tuk, 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 tuk. Just like,
Yeah, I
wow.
see. Like even there, I see message retracted. Um,
Okay, but
yeah, that was for Iwi Tutra Timama T.
okay.
So yeah, that is
Yeah, but I've been watching the whole chat. I'm looking at the
yeah,
chat and just comments kept anyway. But that I have weirdness on my channel as well. Like YouTube just does weird things. But
yeah.
no, this is. I mean, look, it's a lot to take in. It's new. So like,
It
what do you
is.
say to
Yeah.
something that you've never heard of before?
No, no. It's even for me. Like I literally only read it a few days, so it's kind of like I wanted to get it out there because I knew it was great stuff. I didn't get a chance to highlight different things. I wanted actually to extract the text from the file and then
Yeah.
get rid of the bits that I don't want to make it easier for everyone to read.
But also,
Wasn't able to
you know,
get it.
I showed you that book, and I was trying to find it, and I couldn't find the reference for the guy that says that one of the names of Mecca is Jerusalem,
Yeah,
right? And Al Haramain also refers to Jerusalem and Hebron, right?
yeah,
Now, here's another solution, another potential answer. Like, you've got all these other religions, right, that are coming into Asia, and people want to become Buddhist, people want to become Confucius, people want to become Christians. So
yeah,
the Muslims are like, hey, let's build a Mecca here so that to compete. And
yeah,
so there's dispensation to do this obvious carnival, like someone mentioned, building this
yeah,
Disneyland
yeah,
just to keep the vibe going, keep the story
yeah.
going.
Absolutely, yeah. Because the problem is with they've got a problem of distance in the sense that if you're distant from something, from the heart of what's happening, you can easily just get switched off and lose interest. So creating it there close to hand makes it more lively and interesting for the people. I think that, as I mentioned earlier on, I think one of the problems for Islam is the fact that Allah isn't very interesting as a figure because Allah is kind of aloof and removed from existence, whereas human beings like to relate to people or
Yeah.
saints or a Jesus that you can actually see and touch and hear
Hmm.
and that's just human nature. So bringing a focus on a local saint is obviously very powerful. Um, you have the immediacy of it, the fact that you can visit the tomb, go around, you can feel as if you're there with the person. I think that has a very human element that people can
Okay,
appreciate.
fair point. Agreed.
Yeah. Hello to Recent Answers.
He
How's
agrees
it
with
going,
you too.
Thaddeus?
His next comment, he agrees with you. That's great.
Yeah, yeah. Allah isn't very interested. Actually, that should be the title of this. Allah isn't very interested. We'll just call it that. Just rename it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the Islam's like a franchise, or the Kaaba's like a franchise.
That's a great way of explaining it. That's what it is. It's a franchise. Yeah, You get your license, you set up your own business, you rake in the cash. You know, you might send a few bob to the central office in Mecca. It is a franchise.
Good grief. Good
That's
grief.
exactly what it is. It's a franchise, yeah.
Yeah.
But,
I mean, because you'd think, I mean, if it's so popular, that it must be because it's popular for a reason. It can't be an accident then.
yeah. Thaddeus, I'm gonna send you a link if you want to join us. It'd be interesting to hear your take on things. Is that okay?
It's a little bit late here. I wonder how long I should stay on because I'm pretty naked.
I'll let you go shortly. Let me just
because I was out and I came right in.
Oh yeah.
From
Sorry,
outside.
no, I've put you through it. Okay, I've sent you a link. Hopefully that got you. Feel free if you want to join us. We'll be wrapping up. Okay,
You said
Thaddeus will
5
join
minutes.
us in 5 minutes. Now, feel free if you need to go, but if you can hang on a few minutes. But
let me.
And what you call it? What do people think about what we have shown today? Does it surprise you? Is it what's this? Don't delete, thanks. No, yeah, I haven't personally deleted anything. Just to let you know, it's clearly the algorithm is probably deleting things.
Now, also, you know the term Khalifa, Caliph, right? It has a meaning of the successor of the Messenger of Allah, right? Khalif, but that's Khalifat Rasulullah. However, there's an even longer discussion. If you go to the Encyclopedia of Islam, it's got like, okay, it just means you get the Khulafa al-Rashidun, like the first 4 caliphs, and then, but then it says, and in mysticism, so in magic, Khalifa has the following meanings.
Right.
Which is Qutb, the perfect man. Okay?
Yeah.
One around whom the spheres of being evolve. The spheres of...
That sounds like circumambulation around the people.
Yeah. And then upon whom the Muhammadan reality, which is the hidden side of his own reality. Can I show this? Would you mind?
Oh, yeah. Go ahead. Yeah.
Let me show this. So this is the term Khalifa, right? You should be able to see this now.
Yeah.
So look here. Khalifa, right? So you've got this little section about, okay, here's the boring stuff. Then you've got in mysticism, the Qutb, or the perfect man, the Insan al-Kamil, which Muhammad was, right? And anyone, if they can follow his practice, they can become perfect too. Around whom the spheres of being evolve, right? And upon whom the Muhammadan reality, which is the hidden side of his own reality, irradiates. Now, what is important about this is the Muhammadan reality. So we have to go back to the Sirah and to the whole... Okay, so Muhammad was made by Allah before the earth was created. So Allah makes the earth for Muhammad. But you see, the earth and the universe is made out of the essence of Muhammad. So the air that you breathe, the ground that you walk on, the whole structure of matter, of everything, is made from the essence of Muhammad. And that is the Muhammadan reality, that Muhammad is everything and everything is Muhammad.
Yeah.
And this is the hidden side of your own reality. So you become... And then they speak of mystical perfection, and you are granted permission to guide them on the mystical path. And they speak of the Bektashis, because the Bektashis, that came up a lot in your presentation. And they speak of a rank of spiritual achievement where you become like Muhammad. You actually are literally as perfect as Muhammad.
Yeah.
See? So this all has very strong meaning. And to us, it's all gobbledygook. To them, it's very important.
Yeah, the bit that jumped out at me there was around whom the spheres of being evolve. That's visually kind of reminds me of the Imams that basically said, I am I'm a Kaaba. You can circumambulate around me. It's a pity I should have extracted that bit from the paper.
So you become the center of the universe.
Yeah. You become, that's what Islam offers. You become the center of the universe ultimately. When you get down to its deepest, you end up just worshiping yourself. It's it's kind of it's almost like when it's all emptied out or gone to the core, you essentially it's almost like a form of atheism, where you become the center of everything. But
I don't know, man. It's a mishmash. It's soup.
yeah,
Soup. I mean,
yeah,
it certainly has those connotations, and it's got a bunch of other things. And it's just that
yeah,
the weird thing is when you go through the Encyclopedia of Islam, right? Like half these entries will eventually have a mystical, magical, occultic meaning to go
yeah,
with the regular meaning, the boring one that we're all familiar with.
yeah. And who wrote the Encyclopedia of Islam? Is it Muslims or is
Okay,
it
so this is volume
outsiders?
13. I need to bring up a different volume. Let me just bring up any random. Okay, let me look up any random volume.
Yeah, it'll be
Give me a
interesting
sec.
if it's if it is written by Muslims. It's interesting that they are being upfront. That is
Oh
not
no, it's under
the usual
dictionary
thing.
references. Here we go. I'm just gonna grab volume one. I don't know, just gonna grab volume one. Okay, here we go. Volume one. So it's a it's like in its third or fourth printing. It's written for like 100 years. It goes back to the early 1900s or even earlier.
Mm.
And you'll find that the scholarship, here's the scholarship, authors of articles in this volume. Now, notice the very first name is a Muslim name. Sorry, no, that's Buddhist, clearly Buddhist. Abdul Hai, Abdul Wahab, clearly it's a Christian. It's a Christian trying to smear Islam. Oh, this guy,
Yeah,
oh, all of these guys. Arafat, clearly he's a Jew. He's trying to smear Islam. I mean, look, honestly,
yeah,
Aubrey, look here. Aubrey, you remember this guy wrote the Quran, right? He's a Muslim today, as I recall.
yeah.
So look, it's a mix of scholars, but many of
Mixture.
them, half
So
of them are Muslims.
yeah. So it seems to be pretty objective, and they obviously know
So,
what
so
they're
look at
talking
this.
about.
It's 2 pages, 3 pages, 3 pages of scholars' names.
Wow, that is incredible. That's some scholarship.
Yeah, that's hundreds of scholars that have contributed, like thousands maybe, contributed to the series over the centuries or
Yeah.
decades.
So how long has this been written, or like
At
when was
least
the
the early
start?
1900s. I mean, this one is
Okay.
1960. This printing up to
Yeah.
1980.
Yeah.
We can have a look. We can do a quick Google on that. I mean, but if someone can have a quick Google and see when the first printing of the Encyclopedia of Islam was, but I believe it'll go
Yeah.
back to 1913. So it's
Yeah. Okay.
120 years old,
Yeah.
110 years
Yeah.
old, something like that.
Yeah. But it's like the fact that it has people like I think you pronounce it as Shocked. He would be considered someone who's revisionist, to use that. I don't like the term, but you know what I mean. Someone
I mean,
willing to
we're doing
question things.
revision. It doesn't mean we're making up stories.
No, Thaddeus. Hello, Thaddeus. Can you hear us?
Yeah,
Yes,
I
I can
would.
hear you.
Welcome. So what did you make of all of that? I don't know how much of it you caught.
Yeah. When I said hello, I had just tuned in, so I actually didn't hear anything that you were talking today, except for
Yeah.
the joke about Islam being a franchise. So, based on the title and that comment, I'm guessing that you've been pointing to predecessors of the Islamic traditions, that Kaabas that existed before the Kaaba, and Hajjs that existed before the Hajj, and so on and so
Actually,
forth. Is that
the
correct?
opposite is actually ones that existed after.
Oh, okay.
So these
Uh,
are successors to all of these things.
Orthodox Russ says 1913 and 1936.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Orthodox Russ.
Yeah, and then also, I mean, the number of Sufi sects you mentioned, Mel, like the Bektashis and various others, like there were words that you missed them, and I was seeing them. I didn't mention, but there was a
Yeah.
bunch of Sufis connected with everything that you brought up.
Yeah, yeah. So that's a whole area I know almost nothing about.
And I think they like it that way.
Yeah, that's exactly it. But that may change all of a sudden now that I realize how important it is in terms of getting the missing bits. I think that's one of the big reasons, Lloyd, why you're so key to all of this, because that's an area that you've zoomed in on. But so Thaddeus, we've discovered that they had substitute Hajjs in different parts of Central Asia, substitute Kaabas, substitute black stones, substitute what else have we? Substitute Kaabas. So literally a replica that they walked around.
Mm-hmm.
Even substitute Muhammad's. Even so, it's just anything goes. You just make it up, change the story. There was even a cave in China that was meant to be the place where the seven sleepers were asleep. I don't know if you realize it was in China, except
Oh, okay, good to know. Good to know.
and they became Buddhists. Apparently, there were Buddhists in the cave, and then they woke up and discovered that the world had become Islamicized.
Yeah,
You know?
this is pretty incredible. They felt that the tradition was such that it didn't really matter what the figures were. You could just take your own make your own version of it, and hey, it's just as good, right?
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of what has happened in Russia when they closed down different fast food places like McDonald's, and they literally just put stickers over the old packaging with with a new label. They just literally just use the boxes and so forth, and local franchise.
No, no longer Islam. It's Lamis.
Lamist.
Yeah, but it's like pantomime or play acting. You can just open up your own Kaaba and hey guys, come and do your pilgrimage here. It's like, how is that? It's just kind of random, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. But it's
Well,
it's
I,
it's
yeah,
beyond parody. I think at this stage, it's like if we were making stuff up like this, if we were making like a sketch where people were making new Kaabas and with additional black stones, people say, "Oh, that's ridiculous." They'd never do that.
Right.
We can't hear you, Thaddeus. Your voice.
Yeah, Thaddeus, you're worse than me with your audio mistakes these days, Thaddeus. You know how bad I get.
You're like Dr. Evil with your cat.
Yeah.
Hello, Mr. Bond.
Your cat walked on your mute button, Thaddeus.
Yeah. You'd think after 11 hours live streams that he'd have the hang of it at this stage.
Yeah.
can you hear me?
Yes, we
Yeah.
can. Yeah.
So,
Oh, you can hear me now?
yeah, can hear you loud and clear.
Oh, okay. Oh, cool. Oh, I did it. So the cat knocked it, and apparently that disconnected it, even though it wasn't visibly disconnected or anything.
No, the cat walks on his mic and the dog eats his homework.
Yep. I think the Islamic story here is that people saw that this new religion being created was successful, and they're like, "Hey, we can do the same thing, and we could also make money here." And they're making money down in Mecca. Hey, we can make money over here in India.
Yeah, absolutely. That seems to be the game, So you just need a local saint, build a mausoleum, get people coming to it, and then away you go, and introduce all the features of the Kaaba and Mecca and so forth. So that's it, really. I think we'll wrap it up there. I'm not going to do a 10-hour live stream. Any plans to do any more big get-togethers in the future?
We'll definitely have more of those. I don't have a specific date planned, but it was a big success. Huge feedback, positive feedback from the audience. So many people came by. I had a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I was the only one that was there the whole time, and so that worked
how
out
you did
well.
it.
People came and went as they had time, and that worked out really well because you guys in Europe, you could come early, and then people in the US, especially on the West Coast, they could come late. So it worked out pretty well having that long stream. So we'll definitely do another one. I don't have a date at this time, but definitely something we'll go back to.
Yeah, very good. So that's it. I'm going to call it a day. Thanks a lot, both of you, for coming along. Obviously, today was just a case of just dropping the bombshells, and then later we'll probably unpack all the individual bits and maybe repackage it and make it more digestible, But I think it's another little nugget to have in terms of the argument why Islam is false, which is that it's not even consistent with itself. It's just making things up as it goes along.
Yeah, but I'm
Yeah.
starting to see like little leanings towards this whole magic, the occultic stuff, because of all
Yeah.
the mention of the Sufis and all of that.
Yeah,
And it's just I'm starting to see I think we're slowly starting to head in that direction. We're drifting in that direction.
yeah, definitely. There is a, like that was something I saw a couple of years ago when I was looking at the Babylonian incantation bowls. It seems like they were borrowing that for the Quran, planting magic spells, as it were, in the Quranic text. I think you made a point, Lloyd, about the fact that the different kiryat, is it kiryat or karats,
Ahruf. Yeah, Ahruf.
ahrufs of the Quran could be that they have encoded it in a magical sense, maybe through the arrangement of the words or the
The
number of
Sufis,
verses.
there's those weird letters in the beginning of some verses, some chapters like Alif, Lim, Mam, and all of those things, words
Yeah.
which no one knows what they mean, only Allah knows.
Yeah,
The Sufis outright, no, look, I mean, whether or not we believe them, but the Sufis do state that these are not meant to mean anything. They are used for incantations. You have to separate from your conscious mind by using these nonsense words, this word
yeah,
salad. You
yeah.
repeat them as incantations to separate so that you can
Oh, yeah,
enter into the non-conscious world, what they call the post-conscious world.
yeah,
And then you can then go through the veil and join with the throne of Allah and all that nonsense.
yeah,
So these are actual incantations used along with they say special hand signs and some other practices like the way you sit and all that, and then it's for
yeah,
magical practices.
yeah. All right, listen, we'll say good night
All
to
right.
you all. Thanks a million for
Right.
showing.